Mr. LaFever, can you confirm that you can hear me okay?
The only thing that I sort of saw significance was, my comment is that the Sheets thing is really big. Here is really big because of the dining facility. All those windows. Can't say I object to it, but it's pretty big.
I'm guessing.
Okay.
sublease or the note. There is a provision for extra rent. It doesn't say when that extra rent is going to be paid. Is that a monthly rent? I like to say it'd be a monthly rent. But it doesn't say. No, there's a extra add-on percentage upon value. I did, I had, yeah. Sure, I see that. That's theirs.
Evening. Evening. Doing all right. How are you?
Okay.
Still not quite used to the time switch.
Yeah.
Fortunately, had a dog. He wanted to go out an hour earlier than I was ready to get up.
They don't know about the daily
They don't get it.
I really did expect it to.
A little bit other than that, went pretty good.
Can't imagine you want to miss that much fun. Oh, actually, we didn't get pizza.
No.
We got Chick-fil-A.
Cindy, can you confirm that you can hear me?
They don't serve.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Where's the nearest one at? I think I have a mouse. I don't like the touchpad.
You,
Oh, he is a man.
How everybody? I'm doing good. It's 7 o'clock, and that clock actually has been updated, so now we're on time. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the East Hempfield Township Board of Supervisors meeting. I normally have a long reading of the rules, but basically this meeting is going to be held virtual as well as in person with Zoom. For Zoom, if anybody like to speak, they must submit the request in chat and be acknowledged by our administrator on Zoom, who will then make the board aware that that person wishes to speak. To speak, you must be a resident or a property owner in the township, and you will be limited to 3 minutes for the agenda item or for the public comment period. And Robert's rules will apply in our meeting tonight. This meeting is recorded. And in addition to the recordings, we will be doing our roll call votes since we're utilizing Zoom. So with that, I'd like for everybody to stand for a moment of silence in the pledge. Now the pledge. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Okay, our first item tonight is going to be the consent agenda. The purpose of the consent agenda is to approve routine items that usually require very little debate or discussion. And with that, we'll now open up the consent agenda for any comments of the board.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in review of the consent agenda, there's one item I want to address, and that's the 2001 Yellow Goose Road. There's just a piecemeal approach of finishing the details of that project, and we're getting into a season where they won't get done. And I respect the engineer is doing inspections and reductions, but it's just a process that really needs to come to conclusion. So I think we maybe should send a message to the engineer that there's a deadline we expect to be met and we want it to be approached seriously. We don't want trucks parking in the dirt areas and doing things that are definitely not approved for that plan. And that's my only comment for the consent agenda.
So you're just relaying that to our engineer at this point?
Yeah, it's David Miller, please.
Okay. Any other comments about the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, I entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda. Okay, motion from Mr. Bennett. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. LaFever. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Next, we're going to move on to development services. The first item is 2655 Harrisburg Pike rezoning. Authorize staff to advertise the public hearing on December 2nd. Ms. Switzer, I'll turn that over to you first.
Sorry?
What's that? Okay, Mr. Beck. I will
The
The
turn it over.
rezoning, I'm sorry. Okay. You're
Um,
moving too fast. Slow down. No.
Mr. Chairman, staff is asking for permission from the board to advertise the rezoning for the December 2nd board meeting for a public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah, what he said.
If there's any discussion of the board. Okay. Then I will, anybody in the public, we actually do a public here tonight. Okay, seeing none, then the motion is to authorize staff to advertise a public hearing for December 2nd, 2020 for the 2655 Harrisburg Pike rezoning. Do I have a motion?
No move.
Okay, motion for Mr. LaFever. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Mr. Wigglesworth. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Next up, we have Lime Springs Village, Marietta Avenue, approval of dissolution of North Springs Site Association. Mr. Beck.
You gentlemen remember a couple meetings ago, similar situation came about for the farmstead, which Homestead Village purchased off of the developer. As part of that purchase agreement, they ended up dissolving the homeowners association. It's the same instance here with Lime Spring Village. The developer is selling Lime Spring Village off to E.G. Stoltzfus, other entities associated with E.G. Stoltzfus, and they need to dissolve the homeowners association. The attorney provided a recommended motion, and staff does not have any issues with this. It's been reviewed by the solicitor, and she agrees, and she has no problems with it.
Okay. Is there anybody here from the applicant who would like to speak about this?
Yes, John Madiak on the Zoom call. I think Mr. Beck explained it correctly. It's a similar situation to the farmstead. There are 2 units that were created in the site association. There are 2 units that are going to be on, or 2 lots that are going to be on that Lime Spring Village plan. Those lots are very similar to the units. They'll just be owned by the current owners after the dissolution of the site association. And again, it's required because of the provision in the declaration, as explained in the letter.
Any discussions of the board? Okay, any discussions to the audience? Okay, see none, this is a very long motion, so I'm gonna read it in its entirety. The motion is that the East Hempfield Township Board of Supervisors formally approve the following: the dissolution of the North Springs Site Association, the termination of the declaration of covenants, restrictions, easements, and establishment of owners association or North Springs Site Association, conveyance of all common facilities, including roadways within the planned community known as North Springs Site Association, from the Site Association to Lime Springs Property LP and Lime Springs North LP as those parties agree, authorizing the township manager to execute such other reasonable documents to evidence the foregoing, which are acceptable in form to the township solicitor, and as a condition of the foregoing, Lime Springs Property LP and Lime Springs North LP shall record an agreement immediately following the termination of the site association and transfer of the common facilities, identifying how they and the future owners of the lots on the village plan will undertake and share the cost of the actions formally undertaken by the site association. So that is the motion.
So moved.
Okay, motion from Mr. Bennett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Wigglesworth. Ms. Schweitzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you.
Next, we have Brookside Phase 2 sheets. Approval of the Phase 2 final plan modifications. Mr. Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you use the final plan for the sheets development, it has been to the Lancaster County Planning Commission. It has been to the Township Planning Commission. Lancaster Planning Commission recommended approval, as did the Township Planning Commission. However, during the Township Planning Commission review, they did bring up some concerns that they had, most notably with the drive-through queuing. Representatives are here for the development, and I believe they have looked into the situation and provided some presentations to show the board how the project is going to address any queuing, or how there is no queuing issue with the proposed drive-through at the sheets. Other than that, staff and township engineer are recommending approval of the plan and approval of the modifications.
Okay, is there anybody here from the applicant that wishes to speak?
Good evening. I'm Joel Young from Route 2 Associates. I'm here tonight also with several other of the design team members, including Brent Brubaker and Dave Smith, both from Sheets. Mike O'Brien is here from Oak Tree Development, with Mark Stanley on Zoom, and Claudia Schenk from Nice also here. We have Craig Malott from TPD if there's any traffic questions, and Andy Miller and myself, Joel Young, are from Route 2. So we have a full team here to answer questions you may have about the project. A little bit of background, I think we have the plan tonight, John, to look at the overall plan.
Diane, can you bring up the sheets plans?
I think the supervisors are somewhat familiar with this plan. We've been before you a number of times on this. First back in, we had a master plan in front of the township late in 2019, which included the sheets as part of that master plan. And it's in the same location it was during that master plan, same configuration. We also were back in front of you late last year and early this year with the preliminary subdivision, final subdivision and preliminary plan, which were approved. And for phase 1 and phase 2 final plan, this plan, was submitted to the township on July 28th of this year. With the plan, that's the stacking. I guess we can address the stacking first. Of the two comments on the plan was that was mentioned during the planning commission meeting, which that meeting was on October 14th, I believe. One of the questions came up from the planning commission about the stacking of this has the stacking of the drive-through for the sheets. The sheets has a drive-through from made to order and pickup. And if you can see the plan that's before you here, the stacking here is the sheets building itself, which is 6,077 square feet. Main gas canopies this location, but there is a drive-through area here with a order board, which goes again through here for pickup of food on the site. Suggestion and discussion with the planning commission was that in order to allow for greater stacking, the order board originally was further back in this area. We worked, and Sheets came up with the idea to, or worked with the discussion of the planning commission to move the order board further up in this location, which allowed greater stacking for cars before ordering. Also, another thing that was also brought up is just some greater clarity needed on the striping and signage plan for the sheets. And we also, after the planning commission meeting, submitted that striping and signage plan to the township for review. And also, those are the major comments we had. We also are, of course, in receipt of an October 5th David Miller Associates letter, and that's a letter which we don't have any real issues with. There are technical or administrative items which we are addressing or already have addressed to this point. And there were 5 modifications on that, which were, as Mr. Beck mentioned, were recommended by approval by the township engineer and recommended approval by the planning commission on October 14th. More than happy to answer any of those questions about the plan. And I guess right there's the other image, just to give you a little context that's up, is showing the overall location of the plan. This is State Road here with the signalized intersection. The sheets in the same location that you have seen it before, with access drive A entrance into the site. One entrance in this location. There's actually a second entrance off from right in Ole, off State Road, and a third entrance that will be added to access drive B in the back area. Now, these access drives are part of the overall phase development for Brookside. These access drives will be extended further into the site as future phases come online, and will be in front of you again with those subsequent phases. A couple other things also to note, as you can see, we are showing full sidewalks around the site, and which will tie into further developments of Brookside as we move on, as we have shown in the master plan and in preliminary plans for the project. And also, this plan has its own stormwater facility. The board may be familiar that the overall Brookside and Penn State Medical Center has a landscape, or I should say floodplain restoration program and plan that's being put in place for the project. Most of that's being put in place right now for phase 1, which is the medical center. This side of State Road, that will happen during a subsequent phase of the Brookside project. So what we're doing in this plan is actually incorporating in this location a stormwater management basin to accommodate sheets at this time. That'll stay in place until such time that the remaining landscape restoration, or I should say floodplain restoration, is going to be installed downstream. And at that time, this basin will be removed, but it's in place and to your standards for the township to be used while until those other phases come online. A lot of things I mentioned there. We're here to answer any questions you might have about the plan or any aspect of it, or go over the modifications, whatever the board would prefer.
Any questions of the board?
Just a couple of questions, Joel. On the design of the sheets, this looks similar to the sheets across from the auto auction. Would that be about the same size generally?
Is it about the same size as that one? Yes.
Okay. Has there been any discussion about lighting and possibly modifying or in some way the lighting at the location? And then my third question would be having to do with the gas pylons. How bright are they going to be? I recognize, they're going to need to be bright, but I think there's some concern in the neighborhood about just lighting and aesthetics and how well this site will fit in to what's going on generally in the Brookside development.
They're very good questions. The, the answer for the lighting is sort of probably twofold. First, we are making sure that per the ordinance township, that we're making sure the lighting is cut off at the perimeter so we don't have excess bleed of lighting off the actual parcel itself. I think that in most cases, light is trying to be forced, downward, and so it does not get to the neighbors or gets far off of the site itself. Regarding the opportunity for that, as far as the pylons, I don't know if there's any other details we can offer on that. Sheets.
Good evening. My name is Brent Brubaker. I'm the engineering permit manager with Sheets. To discuss a little bit about the pylon, the sign that we're proposing along State Road would be a two-pole design sign, would have the Sheets head on top, and we would have two gas pricers underneath that particular sign. They are internally illuminated. So if you would actually measure the foot candle being emitted from the panels themselves, I don't even think it's under 1 foot candle, but you can see that it's lit. So, if you would stand back and see it, you would see that it's lit, but it's not actually casting any light from the panels themselves, if that makes sense.
It does.
And what was your last question? It was,
Well, I think it had to do with the appearance of at the gas pump. I call that a pylon. You're gonna, it looks like, here we
okay,
go.
the actual
Here we go.
canopy.
Acro-
Okay, yeah, let's
Across
talk.
let's just say across the top, I know red is a big color with Sheets.
Yeah, so this actually, for this particular location, we're actually proposing to install what we refer to internally as our new canopy design. So this is not going to be the conventional backlit canopy that you see at many of our stores. So it's actually, the roof itself is not lit. The lighting for this particular type of a canopy is actually installed on the truss members underneath, and it's a LED lighting that's cast straight down to the fueling area. So this area will not glow like a lot of our canopies do. So this is very similar to the canopy at the Eden Resort. I think some of the color of this canopy is slightly different. The canopy at the Eden Resort had some colors to match the existing hotel there. So this has got our red color on the fascia of the canopy. And the stone that's around the canopy columns themselves will complement and match the stone that's being used on the building facade. Okay. Real quickly, as far as the brick and the stone that we have on our building, we did work with we worked with Oak Tree on this, so that the brick color and the stone color is a lighter color than what we do standard. So we've actually using some different materials here to try to match some of the aesthetics of the other buildings within Brookside.
Okay, great. It looks like you've given some good thought to all of this, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Also, just a quick question. You'd mentioned the Eden. I noticed that the Eden, the awnings, and I think the roof might be black there. Any thought to that over the red?
So the black on the top of the roof would be something that you would only see from above. We checked into that at the Eden Resort. That was actually something that was added pretty early on in the project. I checked into it. There was we're not proposing that here. This will be the regular metal decking that you would see from above. The material to actually put on there to do that, it was actually quite expensive that we did. And that was something that we ended up negotiating with the landlord, our landlord there.
And the awnings as well? Are they?
I'm sorry?
The awnings, is there an expense to those to make them a different color?
These particular awnings right here?
Yes, and the ones up top, like for the windows, yes.
Yeah, I mean, these are our, this is a standard, the standard Keller, of the, of our brand. So that's the Keller we went with. I do think you're right. The Eden Resort was a slightly different color on that as well. We weren't proposing anything different from that. The only thing we changed outside of our standards was the actual brick itself and then the stone at the bottom. And you can see in this, well, the other thing we did do, on the front elevation, which is the one on the top, we also, this is normally brick. We actually changed that to stone at the request of Oak Tree as well. So we made a little bit of a modification to the materials there as well.
I guess my question is there an expense for you to change that to black, and is that an option?
Well, I think there would probably be an expense. I think, more than anything, that would be something that, a decision that I'd have to run up through the brand of the company. That's very similar to the process that we had to do here with the brick and the stone. I don't, it's typically, we don't like to change that if we don't have, reds are Keller. It's all part of the brand of ours. I know there was a lot of rumbling when we made the Keller changes at the Eden Resort, but that was something that was negotiated on before they signed the actual lease deal. Other than that, that's all I can think of at this point.
We've been working with, I'm Mike O'Brien with Oak Tree Development. We've been working with Sheets for over a year and a half, and one of the things they've worked very diligently with us on is trying to quiet the aesthetics on the building down without negating, their ability to project their brand. And so I think the compromise that we came to is a good one. I think it still represents a sheet store, but it's not, we don't have the blazing canopy with the red light. And I think the color of the masonry will tie in very nicely with the rest of the campus. So I don't know that it was a cost issue, Mr. Wigglesworth. I think it really has been more one of compromise here, trying to get them to still have their brand identity with their building.
And I just appreciate, because when we first discussed it many months ago, we asked you to try and mimic what was done Eden Road, and I appreciate that that's what you're proposing. So.
I had a question about signs. For the right in off of State Road, I see there's a do not enter sign, but which direction is that facing? Is that for people leaving the site or for people who missed the intersection and decide to make a quick shortcut in through? It kind of reminds me of BJ's, where if you're going northbound, people try to turn left at the first entrance instead of going up to light and then going in. I know we got an intersection here. I'm just wondering if people are going to realize they're not supposed to turn left in. So I do see there's signs there. I'm just wondering, who are they for?
Well, which sign, where are they at, Andrew, that you're looking to there? This is the right in only right here. So we have do not exit sign there, the location, because it's only right in only.
So those are, it's to keep people in the site from leaving by that.
Yes.
It's really an entrance. Okay.
Exactly. We do not want them to exit there. That's
Right.
That's an enter only portion of the site. So right in only. To hit that point.
Is there any signage to keep people going, I guess that would be south on State Road, from trying to make that into an, cutting across traffic to get into the site? You know what I'm trying to say? It's,
We have a right turn lane in here, which would allow them to come into the site this way and go right into the site.
right, if you're going the other way, which would be
We're going north.
north, I guess.
Oh, if you're going north.
Right. I'm just thinking like they, what they do at BJ's, where they turn in there when they're not supposed to. And the same thing happens at I guess it's at Turkey Hill or Sheets at Columbia Avenue and Centerville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, part of it's the geometry of making sure that it's angled correctly, so it's sort of a hard negotiated turn to get in there.
Yeah,
I don't know
I mean,
what-
you'd hope people would be smart enough to just go in at the light, but you never know. All right, I was just wondering if,
Yeah, I think our intent was to design to have it at the right geometry to allow for ease of flow this direction, but angled such that it would be
Yeah.
sort of an inconvenient turn at least for someone to cut across the traffic and sort of
yeah.
sharp turn into it.
That's going to be a 5-lane section here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's all I had.
Thank you.
On that plan, can you indicate where the FEMA 100-year plan is, or,
Yes, actually, on this plan, you can really not see it. It's actually, you can just see it on the north part of the site down in this location. Yeah, there you go. You see
that's
it's,
the line right there?
yeah, the line's right through there.
Okay,
Yeah. This is all outside of that floodplain.
I see that, then, yes, thank you.
Hmm.
Has this plan been reviewed with the local fire officials?
I
for
believe they have looked at
access
this, I think. Yeah, we do submit turning radiuses and everything else as part of our plan.
Has been, okay.
Mhm.
And the height of the apex on what I'll call the tower, what is that height?
It's sort of the entry tower area, that was probably 24 feet? 24 feet,
24. Thank you.
certainly.
Okay, any more discussions of the board? Okay, any discussions of the audience? Okay. So seeing none, we have two things we're going to need to approve tonight. We'll start off with modifications and then we go to the final plan. The motion for modifications is a motion to approve modification request number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5 for the Penn State Health and Brookside Phase 2 Sheets Final Plan Township File number 19-01.07, subject to staff and engineer comments.
So moved.
Okay, motion for Mr. Bennett. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second for Mr. Weaver. Mrs. Schweitzer, please pull the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Next up would be the final plan approval and the motion to approve the Penn State Health and Brookside Phase 2 Sheets Final Plan, Township File number 19-01.07, condition on resolution of all outstanding staff and engineering comments within 90 days of plan approval, unless extended by the board for cause shown, or plan approval will be null and void. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion from Mr. Wigglesworth. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Bennett. Ms. Schweitzer, please pull the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, appreciate it.
Next up, we have Traditions of America Phase 2 Final Plan, on Miller Road, approval of the Phase 2 Final Plan. Mr. Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is basically an extension of Phase 1, an additional, I believe it's 96 homes in Phase 2. It is still all completely in East Hempfield Township. No modifications are part of this plan, and it is a fairly clean township review, our engineer's review letter. At this point, township staff and the engineer are recommending approval of the final plan for Phase 2 for TOA.
I can't remember the last time we approved a land development plan without any modifications.
Well, fortunately, most of them were handled under the preliminary plan, but yes, absolutely, it hasn't been, it's been a very long time.
Just making a comment there. So, any discussions of the board? Okay, anybody from the audience? Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Final plan, motion to approve the Traditions of America Phase 2 Final Plan, Township File number 18-04.07, condition on resolution of all outstanding staff engineering comments within 90 days of plan approval, unless otherwise extended by the board for cause shown, or plan approval will be null and void. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A motion from Mr. Bennett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. LaFever. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So next up, we got the Recreation Authority. So we got our my favorite Recreation Authority solicitor here in the audience. So we have Recreation Authority's got a lot of action items here tonight. So looking at the beginning, the first one is revision to the previously adopted agreements that have been prepared to address the lease and transfer of the liquor license. And we're going to be discussing the ground lease between the Recreation Authority and Township, sublease between the Recreation Authority, Township, and Blue Collar Hospitality LLC, purchase and sales agreement between Blue Collar Hospitality LLC and the Township, and the power of attorney coupled with the interest in liquor license. I don't know how we begin this.
So let me at least start, and I have my backup plan here.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
So you've seen these agreements before, and hopefully this is the last time you're going to see them. We had some issues with getting the LCB regulations and rules in line with what we wanted to do. So the modifications that you see with these agreements reflect that need to satisfy the LCB requirements. We did branch out and we engaged an attorney out of Harrisburg who specializes in liquor licenses, Saxton Stump, thanks to Mr. O'Brien. And she has guided us into the modifications that you see before you. So between her and Frank Mincarelli, who's in the audience, we have developed hopefully the final set. So the ground lease is just being reaffirmed. It still takes it from 5 years to 10 years. The sublease now has provisions in the transfer of the liquor license from the township to Blue Collar for $1. And the purchase and sales agreement expands upon that decision to transfer the license. The sublease is essentially the same with the exception of the charge that we are charging the sublease Blue Collar. We have added $500 to reflect the use of the license to their lease starting in year 2. The actual transfer of the license was a bit concerning to me until we really got comfortable with it. And according to the attorney in Harrisburg, and I think Frank agrees, is the transfer of this license is going out of the township's hands into Blue Collar. There is no value. They can't use it to, they can't leverage it. They can't sell it. They can't sublease it. They can't do anything. As soon as the sublease is no longer valid for whatever reason, it gets reverted back to the township for $1. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, unless there's additional information that they have, or you have questions.
Do you have any more you'd like to add?
Already, I was talking with Mr. Bennett prior to the meeting, so there's going to be a slight revision to the sublease, because right now it doesn't mention when the additional rent is paid. And is rent based on sales. It's indefinite as to when that's due, so that has to be clarified.
Okay.
That's minor. I think that Tom may have, or Mr. Bennett may have some other questions of Brian. But otherwise, what Cindy said is all correct. The transfer of the license, it was originally going to be set up like a management agreement, sort of like what you had with Acorn Farm, but your employee is leaving, and as a result, there's going to be no one at the township that can do the things she did. What she did was prepare the liquor list, buy the liquor, all those things under the management agreement that otherwise would take an employee of the township to do. So that wasn't going to work. Consequently, it became a person-to-person transfer. That's why the new agreement was prepared. Other than that, gentlemen, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them. As I mentioned, Mr. O'Brien's here. Mr. O'Brien was the chief negotiator with Blue Collar, worked out the terms, bundled them to me, and I got involved with the preparation of the documents. So questions for Mr. O'Brien, he is also here to address.
Mr. Bennett, we'll start off with you. So,
Okay, this all looks good to me for the most part. I did have the question about when the additional rent was paid, and I think you'll take care of that. Mike, I had a question on, actually, it's item concerning, and again, it deals with additional rent. It has to do with what will be included in the additional rent. While I understand that they'll be doing distilling on the property under a separate license, I wouldn't have expected that to be part of the additional rent for the license and for the lease. But I do have a concern about bottle sales, which I interpret as sales that we would make, or that they would make on the golf course. Beer, alcohol, sales under our license or the license that we're transferring to those. Will that be included in the additional rent? It will be. Okay, that's the only thing that I wanted to sort of get clarified and be sure about. One more thing, and I think Cindy addressed it, that had to do with portability, where they could take the lease if they wanted to, and they really can't, right? Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the board at this point?
Very excited.
And thank you, Mike, for all the work you and Authority and Tom, all you guys have done. This has been 10 years we've been wanting to do this. It's nice that it's finally happening at this point. Just wanted to thank you personally, because I know you've been taking an active lead on both the restaurant as well as other options at the corner there. And I know it takes a lot of time and effort, and you've been utilizing your contacts, and it's been very advantageous to the township. And at our last budget meeting, we talked about how operationally this puts the golf course into break-even mode now, which has been a goal ever since I've been on the Board of Supervisors to get to that point. So I want to thank you personally. You've been taking the lead on those two items, and that's the critical items to getting us to solve it, and encourage you to keep your effort on the corner, because then that gets us the money to buy a future clubhouse. So it'd be kind of nice to get some reserve money built up in the golf course too for future capital expenses. But we have come a long way, and the Authority has done what we were hoping it would do right from the start, which is start running the golf course like a business and not making it dependent on the township tax dollar to keep it solvent. So appreciate all the effort that you guys have done. So any more discussions at this point on the board? Seeing none. Is there anybody in the audience on this one? Okay, seeing none. Okay, I'm going to read all these different motions out, and we'll take action on them one at a time. So the first action item is actually the ground lease. And the motions to approve the second amendment to the ground lease between the township and the East Hempfield Township Recreation Authority, which reaffirms and restates the increase of the lease terms from 5 years to 10 years. Is there a motion?
So moved.
A motion from Mr. Bennett. Is there a second? Second from the chair. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Next up is the sublease. The motions to approve the sublease for the Four Seasons Banquet Snack Bar Facility between the East Hempfield Township Recreation Authority, the Township and Blue Collar Hospitality LLC, which now addresses the handling of the Four Seasons liquor license. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, Frank, do we need some sort of as amended or to be changed or as amended?
As
Based on
discussed.
tonight's, as discussed tonight.
So I'll read the motion again. Motion is to approve the sublease for the Four Seasons Banquet Snack Facility between the East Hempfield Township Recreation Authority, the Township and Blue Collar Hospitality, which now addresses the handling of the Four Seasons liquor license as discussed.
So moved.
Okay, motion from Mr. Bennett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Weaver. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Next up is a purchasing and sales agreement. In motions to approve the purchase and sales agreement between Blue Collar Hospitality LLC and the township for the transfer of the Four Seasons liquor license in connection with the sublease for the banquet snack bar facility at Four Seasons Golf as discussed.
So moved.
Okay, motion for Mr. Bennett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second for Mr. LaFever. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. And then just to note that the power of attorney was coupled with that, so there was no action necessary from the board. Continuing on with the Recreation Authority, we have the HVAC replacement of the top unit for the Four Seasons banquet, and it would be Resolution 2020-33, a supplemental appropriation to add the anticipated cost of replacing 7 rooftop HVAC units at Four Seasons banquet, and Paragon Engineering Services accepted a proposal to provide design services for rooftop units and accompanying connections. So Ms. Switzer, do you have anything to add?
We have discussed this before. This is a condition of the sublease that the township replace those 7 units above on the rooftop. We estimate the cost at $125,000. We actually are asking for $135,000, which is what the supplemental appropriation resolution is for. $75,000 of that money is coming out of the general fund and going into the golf fund to make payment on that. And that was already included in the budget numbers you had seen last week. So we already factored that in. Paragon has been recommended by our engineering firm to handle the design work on the HVAC systems. We're not designing it fully in order to bid. We're just designing it in order to have a complete set of plans that we understand what needs to happen at the top of the roof and what needs to occur in terms of the vents or the metal underneath that flows the air. Ductwork, thank you. Thank you, yes. To make sure that they are both working together.
We did discuss this with both the finance and admin, and we discussed this last week at our budget hearing. So this is not a new thing to talk about. I have worked with Paragon Engineering in the past, and they are top-notch for HVAC. And I know that we also had Brubaker Inc. was involved, which was also recommending that we bring on a professional consultant. This is really outside the expertise of staff to try and wing together a whole air conditioning system for that facility. So is there any discussion of the board? Okay, seeing none. Anything from the audience? Okay, seeing none. So I'll read the motion. The motion is to approve Resolution 2020-33, providing for supplemental appropriations of $75,000 from the general fund to the golf course fund and $135,000 from the golf to purchase HVAC units at the Four Seasons banquet facility, and a motion to accept the Paragon Engineering proposal to provide design services for the replacement of the HVAC units at the Four Seasons banquet facility. So is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion from Mr. Bennett. Is there a second? Second from the chair. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
Mr. Bennett?
Aye.
Mr. LaFever?
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you.
The next up, we have our DCED grant, Resolution 2020-34, committing to funding 50% of the cost of police body cameras. I don't know if Chief is on the line. Thank you. Or Ms. Switzer, if you would like to start the discussion.
It is essentially a resolution that is committing the township to pay 50% of the cost of the body camera, as we have submitted the grant to DCED, which is a 50% grant. They are asking that this commitment be made.
And from a budgeting perspective, we had budgeted as if we are not getting the grant.
That's correct. We have budgeted 1/5 of the cost of the full price of the body cameras in
So
anticipation.
if this comes, it's just going to help us through some tough
Correct.
years that are coming. But otherwise, we've already budgeted for this camera.
Correct.
And we did discuss this at our last meeting. Anything in particular from our public safety working group that you guys want to add about this? Pretty straightforward. I think we all kind of know that why we need to do this at this point and support our police officers and the jobs that they're trying to do in rather difficult times at this point. And it's good for our officers to have the ability to have the photo documentation of what they're working on. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adopt Resolution 2020-34, committing to funding 50% of the cost of the police body cameras. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion, Mr. LaFever. Is there a second? Second from the chair. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. LaFever,
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth,
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0. Next up, we have the Lancaster County Association of Township Supervisors, LCAT's ballot. I'll let Ms. Switzer start this one off, and I'll probably color commentary.
Pretty straightforward. Township needs to vote by November 30th. You have a slate of officers. They are running unopposed. And I just need a confirmation that this is what the township would like to do.
LCAT's obviously had their issues with how we would hold a public meeting at this point. We did try, we were actually game to doing it at Weaver's, but Weaver's decided that they did not want to host us on Monday of this week. Otherwise, we would have had our annual fall convention on Monday. I can certainly understand why they did not want to host us, but we certainly tried. And so we just have to do this one necessary step of getting our officers in place. We did have Mr. Jones, Tom Jones, that has volunteered and stepped up to join the LCAT's board. And we're excited to have him on board. He will certainly give a fiery personality to anybody that knows him to our board meetings, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So any discussions about the LCAT's ballot? Okay, I will entertain a motion to adopt the LCAT's ballot with the recommended officers.
So moved.
Okay, a motion from, I'll say Mr. Weaver, second from Mr. Wigglesworth. Ms. Switzer, poll the board.
Mr. Weaver,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. LaFever,
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth,
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Just for customary purposes, abstain. So it's 4-0-1. Thank you. I will be glad to serve another year as LCAT's president. It's been a very unusual year. As Ms. Switzer knows, there's been a ton of emails that have gone out from LCAT's to the managers.
They've been busy, yes.
We've never communicated as much as we've communicated over the last year, and we've not held any meetings, which has been a real bizarre serving as president of LCAT's, doing it all by email.
In light of not being able to go to Yoder's and such, I thought maybe it'd be appropriate if you would supply some donuts and have a dinner for us.
I'll bring the ice cream. Next, we'll get the vanilla ice cream. That's what we kind of need and miss from that. Not to mention just doing the passing of the buttered noodles around. Okay, so next up on our agenda item, electronic equipment, meeting room, B&B audio quote, and second quote, Edge Up, Ms. Switzer.
So the board received from staff the B&B quote a few meetings ago, and we were requested to go after additional quotes. We had staff do that, and we got one from Edge Up and also asked Mooresville Communications, which they have not responded. The Edge Up quote is over double what the B&B quote is for. So we're back before you requesting approval of the audio visual equipment for the meeting room, which essentially is 2 TVs on either side of the room, a microphone for the tables, and additional work in the box in the back here.
Okay, any discussion of the board at this point? I will say I've now sat in on many, now that I'm back at Camp Hill for part-time working, I sat in on many Zoom meetings, and there definitely is a need for us to improve
Microphones.
things for people that are sitting in there. When we're sitting in front of the table here, it is very difficult to hear when you're sitting on the Zoom call to hear what the people in this room are actually saying. I mean, right now with us being informally in our board seats here and having them, every one of us having a microphone, I think on Zoom people can hear, but we're not well set up right now yet for actually conducting these hybrid meetings that we're trying to do in this room. So,
Well, that also includes 2 cameras as well.
and that's also another weak spot right now when we're trying
Yeah.
to sit in there because you guys are up there and you're sitting down here and the camera's all the way up there. And it makes it very difficult for people to call in for Zoom. And that's just a trend that's going to keep occurring. Consultants are going to start attending these meetings more and more virtually, even once we get out of the pandemic and get back into
Just
normal. Just the new trend is going to be people utilizing Zoom instead of driving an hour or 2 to come to a meeting. Any discussions of this at this point?
Yeah, I thought the first bid seemed a little on the high side, so I'm glad that we got a second bid and it put things in perspective, so thanks for going through that effort anyway.
Never hurts to get a second quote. Competition's what makes our country well.
You got it.
That's what makes capitalism work well.
Yep.
Any more discussions of the board? Okay, I'm going to modify this motion a little bit to make it more specific. So the motion is to accept the quote from B&B Audio for amount of $25,435 for electronic equipment upgrades to the meeting room. Those are a motion.
So moved.
Okay, motion, Mr. Bennett. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Wigglesworth. Ms. Switzer, please poll the board.
Mr. Weaver,
Aye.
Mr. Bennett,
Aye.
Mr. LaFever,
Aye.
Mr. Wigglesworth,
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye, the ayes have it, 5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more action items at this point, we'll move on to old business, the 2021 budget. Continued discussions with adoptions tentatively scheduled for December 2nd. If there's any discussions from last week's meeting that anybody wants to bring up for tonight at this point?
I will say for the benefit of the audience, not much there, but we are getting 196,000 additional dollars in terms of the care fund, care monies. So that will be added to the budget once you adopt it, or when you adopt it in December.
That was another one of those LCAT emails I had to put out. So we have the potential even getting a third distribution in December, depending on how the money gets used up or not used up in the CARES Act. As the municipalities run out of ways to justify their expenses, they don't have the ability to ask for additional monies. And then it comes down in the end to the last couple of municipalities that have police forces that will be able to get a final request in. So we will probably get a third request of whatever dollar amounts are left at that point. So this is basically another 200,000 that was not budgeted. That's now into our general fund at this point.
I did want to apologize for missing the meeting. I need to learn to use my calendar and not my memory. But Mr. Robinson had offered last year to go over the budget with me when I came on the board, so I think I'm going to take him up on it and I'll try to get in with them next week.
Yeah.
Go over it.
He's very thorough, so it'll be a very, very good explanation. I think probably we were showing what a 3% revenue drop at this point overall with our general fund. But one thing that's kind of interesting that I've been just making people around our municipalities aware is liquid fuel funding was like an 11% drop, which that has never happened before. In all my 25 years of doing local government, liquid fuel funding has always been steady during bad years or has slowly gone up, and with Act 46 it went up rather significantly. For whatever reason, with some of the shortfalls that have occurred in the state budget, every municipality took about a 10 to 11% haircut in liquid fuel funding across the whole state. So we're talking about a pretty significant number, and that's actually our biggest shortfall of all of our funds right now is our liquid fuel funds. That's a shortfall in excess of over $100,000 that we're short on our liquid fuel funding. So just nothing we can do about it. The state basically tells us what they're going to give us, and that's what's in our budget. But it's just interesting. We've gone through a number of recessions. 2008 recession, they flat funded local fields, but they didn't cut it. The 2001 recession, the same thing. And I wasn't active in 1993 when we had our other big recession, so I wouldn't know what they did at that time. But I just know from my 25 years in local government, I've never, up to this point, actually cut liquid fuel funding like they did for this year's budget. So that's just an interesting side bit with what came out of our meetings. I've never had that happen before or seen that happen before. So any other discussions of the board? I will, in full disclosure, let you know I did ask Cindy to reach out to other municipalities and just see in general what raises they're going around in the townships. And she did send out an email related
Getting
to
them
that,
in
so
now,
we'll have
yeah.
some feedback. I'm just cognizant of us just being in tune with what's occurring with our residents too. So, any other discussions? Okay, so moving on to new business.
Old business,
What's that?
may I have another old business?
Yes, Mr. Fear.
At our last regular meeting, there was a consensus of the board to involve David Miller Associates in working on conditional use policy and signage. Has there been any movement on that?
I checked with him today, and he is working on it with his staff. He promised to have it to me by next meeting.
Thank you.
Have what is specific?
His proposal and cost estimate.
Anything else for old business?
And that would be a cost estimate for the work.
For the work to be done,
Okay.
yes.
I would just submit a copy of the Radnor Township sign ordinance to our chairman. Maybe something that we could use as a basis for, moving ahead on this issue. I believe there are a lot of signage is getting a lot of attention with a lot of municipalities, and certainly, we've had our challenges with it. And moving forward, I think we need to do something in a comprehensive way.
Anything more for old business? Okay, new business, my favorite subject, MS4 quarterly reports, July through October. So I guess you're going to run with that, Mr. Beck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is provided from Charity Burkhart from Land Studies, and she breaks it down based on MCMs. So the first one is MCM2, and she's just providing updates that her quarterly updates are being presented to the board on a, as this one is. MCM3, she's still we're providing her with complaint trackings, and she has done some dry weather outfall screenings. She's awaiting a significant rain event for the second group of outfall inspections in inspection area 3. Land Studies and DMA are continuing their BMP inspections and their site inventories, so they are updated. There has been, Charity was able to go out and do some wet weather inspections, but again, she's still waiting on that second one to get out to finish up this section or this round of outfall screenings. As far as public works training, in July, there was vehicle and equipment cleaning. August was vehicle waste oil solvent disposal. September was leaf collection, and October was solid waste handling and disposal. Charity Burkhart provided the SOP or the training materials, and Nate Sturgis, our development services technician, handled the training along with Perry Madonna with the public works crew. Annual report was submitted to DEP September 14th, and we did receive approval of the report from DEP on September 15th. In the next coming quarters, they will continue doing wet weather inspections in Group 3. They will continue the BMP inspections, and they will start doing the annual assessment update to the MCM plans for the first quarter of 2021.
Okay, any discussions on our MS4 quarterly report? When's the last time the MS4 working group met?
Recently.
It was about 2-3 weeks ago.
So we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is manager's report and board group report outs. Mrs. Schweitzer.
The only thing I have to add on the manager's report is we did have a short executive session after the last meeting on the 21st. It lasted from 8:10 to 8:25, and it had to do with a legal matter. I'll entertain any questions if you have any.
Item number 5, Farmingdale Road, the second HOP submission. When would we expect to hear back?
He was hoping that that was going to be within 4 weeks. He submitted it about 2 weeks ago.
Could we maybe get an update before our next meeting? on that?
Yeah, I don't know that he can give that to you because it's up to PennDOT, but
Right.
I can ask him, sure.
Or maybe ask him to check in with PennDOT or push them.
Yep. He did provide me with the right-of-way list, and so we're going to initiate those contacts and begin that work, so.
It would just be nice if we could start that and hit the ground running as soon as the weather turns, if that's possible.
Makes sense.
Any more for the manager's report?
With the warm weather, might the pickleball courts be striped?
They are.
They are striped. In fact, they were playing today. They had some questions or concerns, but
I thought
generally
they were done for the season.
they're happy. No, they're not done. They're diehards. It was nice out today.
It was nice out today.
Thank you for the quick work on that.
I thought they looked good, but
We did have a public works working group meeting. We actually been having a lot of meetings just in general as a township. It was a long meeting. We covered roadwork projects, in particular 2 prospective projects, one that we're seeking grant monies for, which would be the Community Way Roundabout, and then improvements of Stony Battery at Marietta, which is actually a PennDOT funded, TIP-funded project. I don't know, Mr. Lefevre, if you have anything you want to add to that. We have concept plans for both that we have looked at and did send it back. We're doing a little bit more for Stony Battery than what was in the concept plan.
Right.
There has been meetings with, for Stony Battery and Marietta with West Hempfield Township. And we'll see where that goes because they need to be a partner on that project too. So that can't just be East Hempfield Township for Stony Battery and Marietta. I have had some discussions with some board members in West Hempfield, and they do seem pretty receptive to being a partner for the project. So we'll see how that turns out. Any other board group reports? Okay, is there any public comment? Ms. Garber. Okay, I'm seeing none. Anything else for the board at this point? Okay, seeing none, I will let the board know that I wanted to conduct a quick couple-minute executive session at the conclusion of this meeting, and we will not be delivering anything, and we will not return. So with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:05 tonight.